Welcome to Innovations in Education. I'm your host, David Adams, CEO of the Urban Assembly. And on this show, we bring guests every single episode who have made things work in public education. This show is about the innovators. This show is about the folks who are solving problems. This show is about making things work in education. Now, there's a lot of shows out there talking about what's wrong in the education systems, and those are great shows. There's some shows talking about what we're not doing well, and there's a lot to learn from those, but that's not this show. This show is going to be featuring educators who are making things work for young people and improving public education. Today, I am joined by Tiffany Taylor. And Tiffany, you are a passionate, accomplished, and results-driven professional with over 20 years of experience in the education, nonprofit, and public sector. You've most recently served as the education director for Teach for America Detroit, and later you supported TFA's regions across the country as the deputy chief people officer. But now you are the partner and co-president at ASU+GSV Summit and a partner at GSV Ventures. My understanding is, Tiffany, you have had amazing career with multiple awards, including board chairs and board memberships at places like Joyce Ivy Foundation, KIPP Michigan, Black Male Educators Alliance, Reading Partners, Michigan Virtual Learning, Black Family Development Training Institute, and the AI Education Project. And most recently, you've been identified by Microsoft as an inspiring civic leader and showcased alongside 30 African-American changemakers in the 2022 Microsoft Legacy Project. Tiffany Taylor, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much, David.
It's a pleasure. Now, Tiffany, as I've talked about your career, I've noticed you've gone from educator to ed tech. What's been the through line from Teach for America to ASU+GSV in terms of problems that you've wanted to solve as an educator?
Yeah, when I think about my journey from being a classroom teacher with Teach for America to a school leader to working in the government and eventually leading work in my hometown, the through line has always been access and opportunity, right? It's always been about ensuring all learners are ready for the future, right? So focusing on their agency, preparing them to leverage their voices and equipping them to become the rightful leaders in their communities, the cities, and beyond. And at the start and the end of the day, I just fundamentally believe that access is the lever for this work and more particularly for my work, because I know it's the connection between innovation and education, public safety, economic mobility, in every single chapter in my career. Again, classrooms, local communities, or even at GSB has just really been anchored in breaking down barriers, especially for students from communities like my hometown of Detroit. So that's always been the goal, right? Creating pathways where students can fully stand in their greatness and access opportunities that they rightfully deserve.
Well, let's take this back and have this conversation. You mentioned Detroit. You mentioned teaching in the classrooms to now leading innovation at ASU. Help my listeners think through and me think through what that pathway looked like. What was Detroit like? Why Detroit? Why ASU? Walk me through the decisions you've made in your career and how that led to your space now.
Yeah, I'm always ready and willing to talk about Detroit. I'm a daughter of Detroit and my heart beats for my hometown. But David, when I hear this question, I think about the challenges I experienced as a student in Detroit and as an education leader in Detroit. So inequitable access to rigorous instruction, right? Systemic underfunding and barriers that, disproportionately affect Black and brown students. And let me be clear, these aren't just Detroit's challenges, right? The reality for far too many communities nationwide. And these are systemic issues that are persistent, right? They show up differently in various places, but you and I've talked about it, and I've had this conversation with so many other education leaders. They all point to the same need for bold and collective action. But I think about the things that makes Detroit unique for me, and my answer is always the same when someone asks me that question. It's not the challenges, right? It's really, in my eyes, the pride and the resilience of its people, right? Oftentimes you hear about Detroit, you hear about, folks from Detroit, you're so gritty, you all have overcome so much. And all of that is true. And I take pride in that. But I don't think what gets talked about enough is the proof points of innovation, right? And the success that's happening every day. Because when I was a kid in Detroit public schools, I saw educators and students and families who were pushing boundaries and breaking barriers. And my parents, who graduated from Detroit schools, they instilled
You
that
you are
same
you are
grit.
Detroit, Tiffany.
And I've seen leaders, right, take students who didn't think college was an option and guide them towards becoming the first person in their family to earn a degree. And so I think this is true for from so many communities. Those bright spots and stories of innovation and leadership, they exist in every city and in every rural community in every corner of this country. And those closest to the work, our students, our parents, and our educators, they know that these moments of brilliance are happening, even if they don't always make the headlines. So that's why Detroit, it's home. And I fundamentally believe that great things are happening and will continue to happen in my city.
So we're going to talk about Detroit, and we're going to talk about great things happening. Can we talk about some specific ways that you've seen innovation come out? You talk about proof points of innovation, right? You talk about kind of generalizable solutions. Anything that kind of stands out to you as one of those, like, man, this is where I saw problems being solved. And then how's that kind of inspired you to solve problems in your career?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about partnership, right? I deeply believe in the power of partnership. So you mentioned some of the boards that I support, be it the AI Education Project, Joyce Ivy, Black Male Educators Alliance, and the list goes on and on. And every proof point of innovation and partnership that is sustainable, not that just is launched or that's implemented or a new partner that comes to the city because of the excitement of what they think could be true for work here in Detroit. It's those folks who come with a humble posture to say, I have some expertise, I have some knowledge, I have something to offer, but I recognize and honor the leaders who have been in the city and in the community for generations. And I want to do this work in partnership with them. And so, one concrete example is I think of what Dr. Curtis Lewis is doing with BMEA and the school districts throughout the city of Detroit and also in other parts of the country. They're really being intentional about locking arms with school leaders and district leaders and systems leaders to say, how do we not only build the pipeline of Black educators in our community, because we know what that means when our students can see themselves represented in those who are like unlocking their brilliance. But how do we do it in a way that models and leverages innovation and technology and creates spaces for the voices of the next generation of leaders? And for me, yes, emerging technologies is incredibly important. How we're leveraging technology is incredibly important, but how we are readying our leaders to do just that is what's needed. And I just give so much credit to Dr. Curtis Lewis for being an innovator in that way.
It's a great conversation, Tiffany. This show is about solving problems. We have a little intro for the show in the beginning that comes up at the top. We've got a lot of folks out there identifying challenges, but our show is really about identifying those who are solving it and really
Mhm.
uplifting those messages. So I just want to elevate the innovation that you've identified and the folks who have dedicated their lives to being good ancestors. Like, let's do something out here. So the idea of leading GSV and coming
Mhm.
from the education space is something that's really interesting to me because for those who don't know, GSV is a venture fund. Did I get that right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What is an educator doing in a venture fund? Like someone woke up one day and was like, this is what we need. Like, how do we go from Detroit and being really grounded? I hear when I look at your bio, when I hear you talk, I hear you be very intentionally grounded in ensuring that your experience can improve the experience of our Black and brown boys and girls across the country, but particularly where you come from. That's what I hear all the time. So now take me to GSV. How do we get there?
Yeah, I think it goes back to again one of our earlier conversations of just like how my background has shaped me and like what I'm able to do in this space. So I'll start with like as an educator, I have always believed that passive learning is not acceptable, right? So
Mhm.
whether it's in the classroom or at GSV, fundamentally believe it's about rigor, substance, and making sure that whatever we're doing has a meaningful and lasting impact on students and educators and communities. And so that commitment is the foundation of how I lead every day and what brought me to GSV. And so when Deborah Quazzo, who is the owner of, like you mentioned, our venture capital firm and the co-founder of the ASU GSV Summit and Show, when she invited me to join GSV as one of the first educators on the team, it was clear that this role would allow me to bring that same focus to the community. GSV isn't just about celebrating and highlighting innovation. It's about ensuring innovation delivers real impact for all learners. And so I approach this work with the mindset of an educator, right? Always asking, like, how is this advancing the future of students? How does this accelerate learning? How are we listening to students and learners to drive our actions? Like, and how are we ensuring those with proximity are part of the conversation. And for me, more specifically in this role, how are we connecting educators and entrepreneurs, right? Bridging the gap between technology and instruction and ensuring that the innovations we champion aren't just ideas, but tools that empower and uplift and accelerate learning at every stage of life. So, again, that belief in rigor and substance is something I carry into my classroom, and it's something that I carry into this work every single day.
No, there's more than just that belief, though, because I want to elevate this idea that when you were in Detroit, you talked about one of the key innovations that you saw be successful was
Mhm.
like collaboration, working together. And then you just talked to here about how do we connect educators and entrepreneurs. So I just wanted to frame this and connect this for our listeners and also for us here. I feel like this collaboration connection space continues to drive the way you think about problem solving.
Absolutely. That's it. I mean, for the last, well, almost 4 years since I've been at GSD, we have been just evolving how we support our K-12 community, how we learn from that community, and how we become even more intentionally about bringing educators and entrepreneurs together. My team has heard me say this, ed tech entrepreneurs have heard me say this, and our GSD community has heard me say this. I fundamentally believe that entrepreneurs have to build relationships with educators that transcend those transactional experiences because the products they create, the companies they create will be better if they truly understand the priorities and the needs of our students and our educators. And they can only do that by listening and learning alongside educators. And the same is true for our educators, right?
Mhm.
We need to understand the innovations that are on the horizon to ensure that we can fully leverage them to make good on the promises and commitments that we've made to our students and our communities. And so this exchange of learning, this exchange of ideas
Yeah.
is imperative if we're actually going to move the work forward and really help prepare the next generation of learners.
I got an idea, Tiffany. What
Uh,
if we went to Google
Okay.
and we set up a fellowship that brought entrepreneurs,
Yes.
educators together?
Yeah.
Could we maybe call that the Google GSV Educational Innovation Fellowship? Too late to the table?
Just a little bit too late. I appreciate the idea, but in I guess 2022, Deborah Quazzo and Jenny Maggioria at Google for Education and we were in conversation and we were reflecting on what we were hearing from education leaders and the challenges that they saw on the horizon. And we asked ourselves, like, what would it look like to create a space where leaders working at this intersection of instructional impact and technology? And I'm trying to be as explicit as I can be. Instructional impact and technology, not just leveraging technology for technology's sake. Where
Right.
we could like not only create space for those leaders to dream, but also help them get into action. And from that question, the fellowship was born. And so this program was designed to empower superintendents and top level instructional leaders, so chief academic officers, chief innovation officers who are deeply committed to using technology as a lever for equity, innovation, and measurable outcomes. And these leaders are tackling some of the most complex challenges in education, and the fellowship really equips them with the tools, mentorship, and connections to think boldly and act intentionally.
Well, what are some things we're learning from that? Because I want to reiterate that when I hear you speak and when I hear you talk about what you're passionate about, it's about connections, it's about synthesizing, it's about impact, it's about being active, not passive. So, what are some things that we can be learning from the work that you guys have done?
So, what makes the fellowship unique is both the what and the how, right? So, fellows lead district wide transformational opportunity initiatives, right, that address critical themes like building teacher capacity with AI, improving instruction, enhancing student feedback, and prioritizing equity and inclusion. And so, one concrete example is one project called Learn Kit AI. So, these education leaders from different districts came together, and that focuses on enhancing instruction and advancing equity in schools. And then we also have a Level Up Linwood. So they're transforming education in Linwood Unified School District by expanding access to generative AI tools. And, I don't want to talk about this work without talking about our partners, right? Because none of this will be possible. We work with organizations like Transcend and Leading Educators and Women Leading Ed Network, and they provided meaningful workshops and mentorships and tools to support our fellows. And then we also have had Google School for Leaders come out, right, to deliver a session on navigating complexity and change. And Transcend led a fabulous experience to really share a framework for creating sustainable community driven change. Because you know this, when we're talking about this intersection of instructional impact and technology, it's not just the tools that we're using, but it's also the change management that's required to really help people understand the impact that it's going to drive and ready them to use a tool. So ultimately, the program is solving for connection. It's about building a powerful network of leaders who are reimagining education together. And quite honestly, just seeing our fellows create impactful initiatives and just rethink the systems that they lead is just a testament again to what's possible when we invest in leadership and collaboration and bold thinking.
Now, I heard the examples in terms of the learning kit, the level up. They seem to be intersecting a lot with AI. Is AI important in the way that you're thinking about the future of learning and what our superintendents can be doing in terms of innovation?
Yeah, I think AI is important, and I think, David, just being completely honest, I believe it presents an incredible opportunity to reimagine how we approach teaching and learning. I will say that while we've made some progress in integrating AI into schools, what I do also believe is that we haven't yet tapped into its full potential to truly help accelerate learning in meaningful ways. And too often, I'll be honest, I think we focus on AI's ability to enhance productivity, right? And streamline tasks, like reducing administrative burden on educators. And I think that that is incredibly important, right? I remember my days in the classroom, I remember my days as a school leader, but it's just the beginning, right? The rigor gap isn't about just access to education, it's about ensuring all students, particularly those in underserved communities, have access to like challenging and meaningful learning experiences. And my hope is that we should be leveraging AI to do just that in greater ways.
So I hear you talking about this idea that reducing productivity is great or increasing productivity is
Yeah,
great, right? Like 3 hours of grading. Like there
yeah,
are things that we can do better, but I'm getting a deeper sense of what your vision is here in terms of transforming public education. Because you talked about the rigor gap,
yeah.
and how AI can help us address the rigor gap. Can you tell me a little bit more about like where you see AI in transforming public education? Let's talk a little bit more of that rigor gap and what AI can do to help us there.
Yeah. And so, how should I say this? I really believe that if AI is designed and implemented, if it's not done with intentionality, right, it could reinforce inequities by deprioritizing rigor for certain students, right? And I say that because I think you've seen the data. We know that when AI is leveraged thoughtfully, right? I'm talking data transparency, inclusivity in design, educator oversight, right? That's when things shift. That's when a student, no matter what their identity is or what part of the country or what part of the world they're in, they're able to see themselves. And so I think that it's the development and the application is going to be critical to its success in transforming education. I think the other thing that I have to say as it relates to this is that we will always need educators. I'm just fundamentally not in the camp that sees AI as a replacement for teachers, right? Not in K-12 or higher education or workforce. But I do think that there's something incredibly powerful about how learners access information and how educators leverage data. I mean, you've been in education for just as long as I have, and we've all read the books on data-driven leadership. And I think that's exciting. I think AI and emerging tech will allow us to meet the needs of learners and educators more effectively and expand our reach potentially. And I think there's also something powerful in terms of your question around like the transformation of education around, what if we could imagine a future where a student in Detroit can collaborate and learn from their peers in the Mississippi Delta or Ghana or Dubai and broaden their perspectives and build connections across the globe in ways that weren't simply possible before, right? So if AI and emerging tech has the potential to transform how we connect, how we learn, how we create exposure for our students and prepare students for a more interconnected world, I think that is a transformation that will lead to outcomes that we sometimes in the past haven't thought were possible.
I'm 100% with you on that, Tiffany. I'm really invested in this notion that educators and software developers and tech side working together can
Mm,
solve for some of the problems that like it just took willpower to solve for in the past, right? And I'm not begrudging our will, but folks are tired,
yeah,
teachers are tired, the education
mhm,
sector is tired. And
mhm,
so combining these productivity gains with ways to access rigor for students, how do we connect students to supports? I heard you talk about, again, collaboration across whole different sectors vis-a-vis in the United States and different countries. I think we're just at the tip of the spear here, right? The
yeah,
tip of the iceberg.
mhm,
And I've been really excited. I mean, for what it's worth, I was introduced to AI at ASU+GSV many moons ago. I was there for SEL work. And I was like, oh, you guys seem to be really on this AI thing. And that was really inspired me to think about what solutions could be like.
I love it. I love it. And I'm glad to hear that. I always tell people, at GSV, we are investors, connectors, and conveners, right? I think if anyone has heard me talk in the last 3.5 years, they've heard me say that, but I truly believe it. And your experience is what we are aiming to do, not just for educators, but also for entrepreneurs, policymakers, philanthropic leaders, investors, anyone who's really thinking about the future of education. So I'm glad that was your experience, David.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I want to hang on to this for a little bit. I was at a convening yesterday, actually, with the Center Bridge Foundation, and one of the things we noticed, myself excluded, but like I would say 70 to 80% of education CEOs have some Teach for America teaching fellow kind of
Uh-huh.
experience
Yeah.
background. It's shifted a little bit, right? But there was a time, and then we were on the same kind of like cusp of like innovation, right? Where like the smartest, brightest people in America got into education reform, and I feel like a little bit that time has passed, but I wanna think about, like, what we could do if we had $100 million today, right? So, like, I just wanna imagine I got a big check, we drop it over, Tiffany Taylor is like, "Dave, we're gonna innovate." I had $100 million. What would you innovate with? Like, what would you bring that spirit back to solve for in 2025?
$100 million.
$100 million.
So, I think if I'm being completely honest, there's a lot of things that I am excited about in this space. But if I were handed $100 million tomorrow to transform
Mhm.
public education, I put those dollars directly into the hands of students. And what I mean by that is I create opportunities for students to take the lead in shaping what education can and should look like, right? Putting them in the driver's seat with the supports and the resources they need to guide meaningful decisions. I mean, we often talk about proximity, about listening to students and truly hearing their voices, but it's just fundamentally not enough to just include them in the conversations. We have to empower them to help drive the change, and we just cannot continue to say we're readying our students for the future if we're not creating space for them to give input on what that future looks like. And so this funding will go to, like, creating research and development opportunities led by students themselves, like, with the aim of accelerating learning, increasing access, and I think it could be powerful. I've seen some of this work already live out in the Reinvention Lab that it was spearheaded by Michelle Culver and now carried on over at Teach for America, and so I think I would do more of that, quite honestly, because of what they've been able to do since launching that and what I've seen of the students and their ideas and the decisions they make when we give them resources to fund opportunities in other communities, it's always right and it's always grounded by the right stuff. I would make sure that they're leading the way. I give the money to our students.
Well, let me tell you, the WT Grant Foundation has reached out to the Urban Assembly,
Uh-huh.
and we have about 15 students reading LOIs, letters of inquiry
Yeah.
from researchers. And when the research is focused on youth inequity, our students are taking a look at that. They're getting paid, and so shout out to the WT Grant Foundation, right? Because they weren't just
Yeah.
taking their labor; they're getting paid. And what I heard from the students was like the ability to participate in the knowledge generation process has really inspired them to think about, like, back to your point, I can play a role in what we know as a
Yes.
human community,
Yes.
right? So I wanted to really connect with you on that because I think that when our young people are involved and synchronized into a space, they develop a sense of ownership and belongingness.
Yes.
That's our $100 million. We're gonna bring young people together. We'll throw some AI in there, Tiffany. Is that all right?
We can throw some AI in
I'm
there
gonna
for
throw
sure.
some AI. I believe AI can help us do a lot of things. So,
Yeah.
and let's just think about like where they can reimagine and get this work out. All right. I want to think one more time about this question of innovation, if we could. I think we're in a difficult time right now in terms of some of our politics and the notion of innovation and the notion of research and innovation. And I just wanted to think about the role of innovation in public education, right? Like sometimes folks are like, all right, you got your tech folks, super innovative, right? We're going to the moon. We're going to throw a cover in space. You got your education folks. They've been doing the
Yeah.
same thing since 1900,
Yeah.
1862. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like, where does innovation live in public education insofar as our ability to solve problems?
Yeah. So what I would say is, I fundamentally believe that educators are innovators and entrepreneurs in our own right. And, you see it in the classroom, you see it, in our building leads, you see it in our district leaders, our state superintendents. We are I would almost go to say, being an educator, it forces you to be an entrepreneur and it forces you to be an innovator. I think what you're speaking to, and so often what we see highlighted sometimes is that, that innovation only goes so far, right? And I think it's the responsibility of communities like the ASU GSV community to say, hey, but let's open up this world to you as well. Let's give you access, right, to the entrepreneurs who have innovations, again, that are on the horizon that you can leverage to further your own role as an entrepreneur and innovator, as a classroom teacher, as a school leader, as a chief academic officer, and the list goes on and on. I do think while there are a number of innovations in public education, right? And some of them are coming rightfully so from the districts and the schools that are leveraging, Magic School and Tutor by Teachers and Paloma Learning, right? And partnering with community-based organizations in new and innovative ways, or national nonprofits, be it reading partners, or as I mentioned, the work that Dr. Curtis Lewis is leading with BMEA. But I also think about our schools of education, and I don't think we talk enough about the schools of education who have said, we've been in this space for quite some time, but we are taking steps to evolve not only who we are and what we teach, but how we engage and how we are thinking about education and the role of a teacher. And so I think about our partners down at ASU, particularly at Mary Lou Fulton College, so teaching for learning and innovation and
Hmm.
for their next education workforce. And they are really just thinking about the traditional school staffing model. I think sometimes we jump so quickly to what is the tool, what is the emerging technology, or what is the grant, or what is the resource, and we don't focus enough on like the things that matter so much, the people. Their work is really focusing on the traditional school staffing model and just moving from individual teachers in isolated classrooms to educator teams with shared expertise, and really creating opportunities to deepen and personalize learning for students while also making the teaching profession more sustainable. I want, as much as we talk about AI and emerging technologies, I want us to talk about the innovations that are happening that will allow our teachers to be well positioned to leverage these technologies. And it's things like this that we're seeing down in Arizona with ASU's Teaching and Learning Innovation School of Education that I think is one innovation that I'm really excited about and proud of.
That's super exciting. I got to tell you, when we're developing our solutions at the UA, we hang out with our teachers at every step of the way. And one of the things I've been really inspired by is the depth of their understanding of the problem, right?
Mhm.
You talked about educators and ed tech people kind of coming closer, and like what we're developing our classroom automated feedback environment, and we're working with our teachers. And you'd be shocked, I think, to see how deeply they understand what it is that we're trying to work for and how to organize it so that it works for them better. Right?
Yeah.
I've been really, really pleased by that, and it's been an eye opener for me to think about, like, how do I work and develop even closer with our teachers, some of our solutions, because, like, I feel like folks who are closest to the problem know the problem. What's interesting is that they're not always clear on, like, the tools are available for solving it, and that's,
Mm.
like, kind of the work you guys have been so passionate about at ASU+GSV, bringing educators into the solution space, not just the consumer space. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. How can you be a co-creator in the solution space and not just a consumer? You got it. That's it. That's it.
All right. Well, thinking about solutions, Tiffany, we're coming to the end. I want us to think about an innovation in public education that you helped develop that you're most proud of, or an innovation that you were adjacent to that you were just like, yeah, this is it.
I would say, if you ask me that question, I think I would talk about ASU and what they're doing. I think one thing that I am, really excited about is some of the work that I get a chance to do with two boards that I have the chance to sit on. Is one is the AI Education Project. I will never be able to say enough about the work that Alex Coltrane has built, and then also the work that I get to support with Reading Partners that's led by Ola Whitney. And I'll start with Alex. I remember I joined GSC in 2021. And if anyone who knows Alex Coltrane, you know that he's persistent. And he was just like, hey, I'm Alex. I run this, organization called the AI Education Project. I'd like to talk. And I said, sure, let's have a conversation. And this was before Chat GPT was launched, before, AI was the thing that everyone was talking about all the time. And I remember David having a conversation with him. And I walked away from that conversation, like holding on to one thing that he said. And he said, Tiffany, my commitment is to ensure that we're readying all students, no matter where they live, be it rural or urban communities, for the future, right? And AI will impact like what the future workforce looks like. And I said, well, I have to be a part of that, right? I have to make sure that students in Detroit, again, the Mississippi Delta or wherever they live, they have access and their educators, right, have access to understand how AI will shape the future workforce, is shaping the future workforce because it's going to impact their opportunities. And it's also going to influence what we focus on as it relates to teaching and learning, to your point, to ensure that they aren't just consumers, right?
Right.
And that they aren't just being impacted, but they are actually shaping, creating, and ready to step into a workforce that expects something different that it expected from you and I. And so I'm incredibly, incredibly proud. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that they were doing before it was the thing.
Country before country was cool, you could say.
Exactly.
Yeah, before Beyonce dropped her album, right?
Exactly, and I think that's the thing. I mean, and being able to be a part of it before it was the thing is something that I'm incredibly proud of, and I'm proud of that entire team. And the same is true with reading partners. I mean, literacy, right? And this is everything. Right, it is the thing, and I'm so grateful my mom and dad like instilled the love of reading in me as a young child. I was reading, Bears Seen Bears. I know there's probably 5 million other things that I probably
I
should have
got you,
seen.
Berenstein Bears. No, I got you. Yeah.
Hey, I like comic books. My parents made sure I read history, books about my history and what it meant for me to be a Black woman. Like, I love reading, and I remember meeting Ola and her talking about reading partners and the work that they do to support, nearly 10,000 students every year across the country in the ways in which they are not only continuing the work that they've been doing for 25 years, David, but also making sure that they are evolving and growing and showing up with their partners. And I think, the innovations that I'm proud of are the innovations that are developed in response to the needs of the communities, as stated by the communities, be it students or educators or community leaders. And I think that both Ola at Reading Partners and Alex at the Education Project are doing just that. And that's why they are not just sustainable, but they are driving true outcomes.
Well, if you are proud of them, that means something. So look, over this conversation, we have talked about Detroit, from Detroit to ASU. We talked about your background, Teach for America. We talked a little bit about this notion of Google GSV, or the Google Innovation Space and Innovation Fellowship. We talked about innovation itself. And throughout this conversation, some of the key things that I think have really popped out to me is what it means to collaborate, what it means to listen to the communities that we're working towards. Access, right? That people can do great things when given access. And then lastly, this idea of how do we work in groups? How do we work across sectors? How do we bring people together, educator teams, entrepreneurs, to solve problems that are relevant to the communities that we're trying to solve for? So I'm deeply appreciative of the time that you spent here today. I deeply appreciate your continued commitment to our community and serving our community and making sure that all of our students have access to what it means to be great citizens in 2025 and beyond.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much for the opportunity. And thanks for all the work that you do, David. I know, we don't do this work to be thanked, but I see you. I see the impact. I see the fruits of your labor. And I'm so proud to be in community with you. And thanks for the opportunity to share a few reflections.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thanks for listening to our latest episode of Innovations in Education, where we bring education leaders who have made things work in the education sector. If you like this episode, please subscribe so that you can hear more great content around innovations in education. I've been your host, David Adams, and have a great day.